everybody. What's there
Evening,
to
everyone.
see us? Welcome to this special evening, this special open house where Rupert and I will attempt. It's rather brave of us, I must admit, but attempt to give some background and overview to something that's sort of hit the archaeological and megalithic news just recently.
Yeah, you could say it's hit the fan, really, couldn't you?
You could say yes. There's been a few reactions. So before we start properly, I can see that we have 7 viewers already. I've said hello. There's Richard there, Richard Grieve, Mark Summerton. Hello, Mark.
Oh,
Graham Orris says evening, chaps. Margaret
hello.
Bailey we have saying hello. So really great to see you. Chris Brooks. Aha, the usual suspects
Good,
are turning up in droves.
good to
Now,
see you.
yeah. So I presume that you guys that turned up and are watching this are familiar with why we've called this special one, which is well, a paper came out recently called "The Emergence of." Oh no, it wasn't. the
Don't forget this is live.
Don't forget this is live. Radiocarbon dates and Bayesian modelling support maritime diffusion model for megaliths in Europe.
Mm.
Now it's been out longer, a bit longer than people think, but what was it, the week or the week before, it just caused a bit of a flurry in the newspapers and some rather extraordinary headlines, which caused some people to sort of push back a little. I didn't like the idea that was being purported that megalithic culture in Europe began and radiated from northwest France, and particularly the Morbihan area and Carnac, Brittany, of course. Yay.
Mm.
Um, uh, uh, Mark says there's a thumping great big lens in the background there, Rupert. Yeah, now's not the time
Yeah,
to talk about your cannons, all right? Yeah.
pointing in two different directions, photographing two different things.
How
Yes.
did how did it first come across your horizons, Rupert? In what
Uh,
form?
well, excuse me. Along with, I think the same as everybody else, that suddenly it just blew up. That I get archaeological feeds every day from all over the world, and suddenly there was this flurry of megalithic culture originating in northern France, all just hit the ground at once.
Yeah.
And as Mike just said, that when you read the headlines of what's going on in the media, then it's a bunch of numpties who are just making uh, headline grade. It's clickbait, really.
Yeah.
Is a lot of it. Now, that's not in any way to diminish what's actually turned up with all of this, but a lot of the headlines were very misleading, and I think that one of the things that we should get out of the way immediately is that Bettina, the Swedish archaeologist who has put
Bettina
all this
Schulz Paulsson.
indeed. She's not saying that Brittany is home to the oldest megaliths in the world.
Yeah.
She is talking very specifically about the spread of our megalithic culture throughout Europe. So, yes, there are older megaliths around the world, but they are not of the same cultural origin. And it's open to debate whether they were convergent or divergent. We don't really know where some of those ancient sites, particularly those, personally places that I've wanted to visit in Armenia, for example, where they are considerably older, but it is distinctly possible that that they developed quite independently.
Yeah.
What Bettina has uncovered here with this astonishing piece of work.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling how much work has gone into this. But what she's found is that you can actually source the oldest sites, and this includes pre-megalithic, and this is what's so important, that if you can take sites where, what was there before they started putting big stones up, and find certain aspects that don't appear anywhere else, then you can say that this is the hub and everything spread from this point. And seeing it spread around seaboards, so in the Mediterranean and out across the Atlantic coastlines going around you, it's there in your face, and it's no longer an interpreted thing. This is all dated. What she's done is taken every available piece of carbon dating. This has never been done before. Every available piece of carbon dating relating to any megalithic sites, and just gone through them all to look at, is this dating from human remains, or is this dating from organic remains that were underneath stones, whatever they may be, or datings of artifacts.
Yeah.
So look at all these different datings, separate them out so that you know whether you're dating a bone or you're dating a piece of wheat or whatever. Separate them all out, and then refine so you know exactly what you're dating. So you know exactly what the variables are going to be in the carbon dating or in the isotope analysis, what have you. Separate them all out, and then actually bring all that information back together again to pinpoint a chronology. And it's
yes. Most of the articles that you'll will have seen over the past week or so belie the fact that behind this work is probably 20 years of research. I think it's she said herself that it's 20 years ago that she decided on the basis that there hadn't really been an update to the theories about what started when and how. Up until currently, up until this paper, which I must say is also a digest of an earlier book, which was published in 2015. So it's not, hot off the press stuff. This is just that this shortened paper, which, as I say, is a synthesis of a much grander work. What was I saying?
It's a good start.
No, but
we're talking about the articles and saying,
that's right. You've completely broken up now, Rupert. I don't know if you want to sort of go away and come back and see that improves the signal. Rupert being down in rural France, as we know, with some connectivity issues there sometimes.
I shall return in about a couple of moments.
Yeah, all right.
Is it my sound or my vision is worse?
Both. Yeah.
All right then. Back in a jiff.
Hello, Jennifer. Thanks for joining us, but you can't. You say you can send a message, but you can't watch it live. Have a great chat. We'll do our very best. Thank you, Jennifer, and hello to you, Janice. Welcome to everybody. So everybody that's there, please do post your questions and comments. I know you may have read the background material, you may not have done. Whichever way, it posed questions in our heads, and we'd love to hear what questions have gotten posed in your heads as a result of this work. In many ways, it's a sort of a prayer answered for Rupert and I, this paper and this work, because I think we've since we've been doing the podcast and since we've been reporting back to you, we've wanted to develop some kind of chronology, not just for for Britain and our megaliths, but to provide a context for what we know about British megaliths and how it fits in with developments elsewhere. What were the influences? Who was influencing them? And so on and so forth. And to have this work come up right now is a piece of serendipity for which we're very grateful, and we hope that we can do justice to the. I'm sorry, I'm laughing because Mark says, "Quick, let's talk about." Quick, let's talk about Rupert while he's not here. While he's gone. You're a very naughty boy, Mark Summerton. So I was saying I hope we can do justice. I mean, we haven't had a lot of time to research the stuff. But I think also for us, it's all this work is completely full of surprises. Because, as you know, when we did Standing with Stones, the film, we didn't do much about chronology in the film. We just concentrated on sort of, I don't know, just ploughing through them, making a gazetteer, enrolling people in the idea that there was a lot more in the UK and Ireland besides Stonehenge to go and visit. And we didn't pay attention much to what caused what came first, and what came behind. That should be Rupert coming back. Seems a bit better. So that definitely seems better so far.
Is it?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
I think it is.
All right. I was just explaining. What I was just saying is that this study is good for us because we've been looking for chronologies since we did Standing with Stones. Since we didn't cover chronology in Standing with Stones, and since we've been doing the podcast, we wanted to begin to understand properly what caused what came first, what came in between, and who was causing and what the possible cultural developments were, what the possible cultural impetuses were behind our megalithic monuments, and this is grist to the mill.
Certainly is. I think one of the important things to get very firmly in perspective with all of this is that there are roughly 35,000 sites, megalithic sites in Europe, and 2,500, just below 2,500, have been dated. So we can't avoid the fact that that whilst the validity of this is pretty damn solid, because the sites that have been fully analysed, it's like, for us, I hesitate to mention Stonehenge in this context because it's a red herring, but I just mean from the point of view that there are certain sites that have been excavated to hell.
Yeah.
And so the principal sites that we know, so Brittany, Karnak being a case in point with this, that so much work has been done that that we know we're starting from. I say we. We know that that they're starting from the right points, but that we can't avoid the fact that this is like 6% or something of the known sites that have actually been solidly dated.
6%,
so
yeah.
There is still a wealth to come out. Where Michael's talking about chronologies and what will come out over time, and inevitably it's going to be a very long time. But to see how these individual sites were hubs and then what spread out from there, so a bit like a slime mold, all these tendrils going out and meeting in different places. it's going to be riveting to see how these things tie up, and how trade routes.
Yeah.
It's going to tell us so much about trade routes and all sorts. It's very exciting.
Well, that is an important part of this discussion. Good evening, Kieran. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Hope you enjoy this evening. Yeah, the trade routes is a very important part of this, because it's there's a kind of giveaway in the title of the piece itself, which is Radiocarbon Dates and Bayesian modelling support maritime diffusion model for megaliths in Europe. Now, that means that we have seafaring folk travelling the Atlantic seaboard and round the North African coast.
Mediterranean is very important.
And of course the Mediterranean, up, and even round to Italy as well. So these were people with a purpose. So we're talking about the establishment of the earliest dates. And when we're talking about megaliths in this context, it's really very important to remember that the only megaliths that you can attempt to date really are tombs, because it is only tombs that have the organic material associated with them specifically. You can't really date a stone circle or a standing stone. Something that's just sinking in for me, this realization that our ability to date stuff with certainty is really, really limited. That said, this is as good as you can get as far as the dating for megaliths, because of course we have standing stones and stone circles and etc. and other megalithic structures associated with these necropolises, or necropoli, would it be? I don't know.
Necropoli, I think, but necropoli.
Yeah, burial chambers. So, so in a nutshell, the paper says, first building of megalithic burial chambers occurred in northwest France, in Brittany, and spread down the Atlantic coast and into Italy, and round into the Mediterranean, penetrated into the Pyrenees, and of course the Balearics and Sardinia, Corsica, and those kinds of places. Now, we haven't mentioned there is the radiation, whatever radiation there may have been, into the UK. And the startling thing is, even in this case, even in the case of the megalithics, UK and Ireland, or Britain and Ireland, were about 500 years behind the...
It's also shocking when you think that it's only last year.
And I'm including Maystown. I'm including Nesebrodka.
Yeah.
I'm including Stennis. Yes. But
that's the thing, that it's only a year ago that we were all whooping and hollering and running round tables because we'd got a clincher on Nesebrodka being kicked off. No, it's very interesting that anything in Britain was substantially later. One of the biggest shocks to me, I don't know why it was such a shock, but it was Sardinia. Why? And then when you look at the fact that these are seafaring people who are actually spreading the culture, you think, well, okay, if you're going around the Mediterranean, you're all going to go to Sardinia. But even the fact that Sardinia holds some of the oldest dates after Brittany, it's astonishing.
Rupert, can I show the nice? The graphic with the orbs representing different phases, and
yes.
Can I show folk that? Hispan, I hope that's how to pronounce your name. You're very welcome. Good to see you there. Yes. Here is a graphic from from the paper. That may not be clear first off. The first places to look at is where the red dots are. You probably see my cursor, which is sort of over Brittany there. And that's where we've got the earliest dates. And the red dots indicate a first phase of I was about to say expansion, but I don't think that would be the right word. Dispersion would be the right word, which seems to extend right down into the Mediterranean and Sardinia. The green blobs represent a second later phase, and it's only then that Britain and Ireland get included. So, right, I'm going to come back to us now. There you go.
And so we're not looking at that diagram anymore?
No, we're not.
Are we?
No,
we're not.
Back
Okay.
to us.
Because you're looking at that first phase of 4,700 BC to 4,000 BC. So you've got potentially 700 years, which is it's a long time. Think of the difference between us now and 700 years ago. It's a long time. So you can see how that spread could, it's enough time for a cultural spread. But then you've then got that second phase when it waved into Britain and Ireland. That's over potentially a further 500-year period. Now, that means that you're talking about 1,000 years, a little over 1,000 years, for that culture to actually spread wholesale across Europe. So when you look at it in that context, it's that's plenty of time, plenty of time. But it is we have to see it as coming down to trade in the first instance.
Well, what's absent from the paper, Rupert, and it's a notable absence, and of course, absent from the paper, none of the media will have mentioned this. But these expansion routes, if you like to call them that, and especially where the places where most of, not all, but most of megalithic buildings started to take place, were source areas for Jadeite stone.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
And Karnak and that area is a colossal source for Jadeite stone artifacts. We're talking about the green stone stuff, most notably beads and jewellery. So it seems that the driver behind all this was some kind of value system, actually. Can't say money, but obviously value was put on this particular stone, which had people plying these seaways and taking ideas and culture with them, backwards and forwards, to and from.
Values and vanity, yeah.
And here's the interesting question about it, I think. Was the dissemination people going out from Karnak, or was it people coming to? Or was it both ways?
What a question.
So I'm just posing that now and see if anybody has any ideas. What we'd really sorry, I can't answer your questions right now, Hispan, because I'm not quite sure what you're referring to. We're talking about Bettina Schulz Paulsson's paper at the moment. It seems to be talking about something else. Hispan, who's made a few comments about have we read Vygotsky and Dolomis, so I don't know what those are older scholars, I think, from a day gone by. I don't know, but anyway, The point I was trying to make was, yes, we want to hear questions from you specifically about the problems that may be associated in your minds with this. I mean, the two main ones that, call them objections or memes that might be stuck in our heads. One is, Göbekli Tepe is way, way older than anything else. So why is that being excluded from this? Surely a megalithic culture must spring from the oldest place. And the other thing is, of course, we've got used to the it's not a confusion, but we've just had our heads turned around, as Rupert was saying, by the ness of Brodgar dating and how that is usurping the Wessex area as the centre, if you like, or the capital, megalithic capital of the British Isles. I think both those things, are sort of lodged in our brains as origin places for our megaliths, as it were. And now this comes along and displaces that a little bit.
Yes.
Now, the interesting thing, of course, one of the established memes about megalithic culture, and this springs from the beginning of the last century, end of the 19th, this idea, and it still pervades, that anything good and wonderful must have come from the East in these terms. But what we've got with these dates is not a progression across the map from east to west of dates. We've got a radiation from northwest France. If there was influence from the east in our European, I say our, European megalithic culture, then the dating progression would be from east to west, not a radiation from a single point up in the northwest.
Well, of course, we've known for a long time that that dolmens as far east as, say, Korea, or way later, Bronze Age, late Bronze Age, many of them, obviously culturally influenced, but nevertheless a hell of a lot later. Another of the shockers, in fact, this is a nice one to toss at Mark because he was only there a couple of weeks ago.
Mark Summerton, is that?
Yes. Where is the oldest, the earliest burial in Britain? Cauldron.
Yes. Did you know that, Mark?
I didn't know it until yesterday.
No. I'd have thought anywhere but.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And I think, again, when you're looking at these, we'll put links to the Bettina's source paper as well, so that you can have a look at this online, because it will make a lot more sense rather than trying to get this stuff from many of the online just news.
So we've got a question from Pavlo, which I think is worthwhile addressing, and I hope I get this right. And Pavlo says, but you can't possibly assume that this culture spreading for 1,000 years all over Europe was continuous. That the people using Newgrange in 3,500 BC were having the same belief system as the people in Orkney building the Ring of Brodgar in 2,500 BC. Well, I think that there's a few things in there to unpack, Pavla, and that is the spread was not over 1,000 years. Primarily, it was over a very short range of time. The initial spread from Brittany took place from, well, the earliest we have is the late bit of the actual fifth millennium, isn't it? We're talking about over 4,000 years BC.
I think it's probably my fault, that confusion.
Yeah, and within and the dates for the first spread to the coastal areas was less than 200 or 300 years.
Yes, about 200 years. if you're talking about, so basically you can tie. So you've got Brittany,
Yeah.
you've got Sardinia,
Yeah.
you've got a couple of places in Portugal, a couple of places in on the Mediterranean. Hang on, am I going that way around for you? So the Mediterranean, southern France,
Yeah.
and northern Spain, that hook of the Mediterranean, and some places further south, west in Spain on the Atlantic side.
Yes.
There's about half a dozen sites that you can all tie together to this first wave.
Yeah.
And where I mentioned earlier on, where I said 1,000 years of spread, it's where you can it's where they can tie the dissemination outwards. Yes, it's it's trying to convey too much.
Yeah, and the second thing is that we're not talking about belief systems. We can't speak to belief systems at all because there's no way of establishing that. All we're dealing with is dates of a particular sort of burial, of megalithic burial, in which you've got, say, a dolmen or a kist or a passage tomb or something like that, probably covered with earth. It's just a spread of a type of tomb. We can't speak to holding the same beliefs at all as people in Newgrange and Orkney. And of course, this is not an assumption either, Pavlo. This is, this research is based on actual data and data.
I think it's nice about if he's asking about
she.
I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
That if we're asking about belief systems, then no, we can't. It's unknowable almost, really. Until you get into something more like the Orthodox religions that we know of, where we can see the information's there, depictions of the same gods and what have you.
Pavlo, that's a really great question, because it sort of helps us sort of focus, get down to the nitty gritty of what this paper is about.
What's worth defining on how we can see this the cultural spread is that, for example, you can argue that it is perfectly natural and instinctive to bury our dead, and so without any cultural influence, then you would have any amount of different types of burial in the ground. And maybe cairns, where stones originally, you could argue that stones were piled on top of burials just so that wild animals wouldn't dig your loved ones out of the ground for a quick meal. What makes the cultural spread so clear is where you get types of structure that are by no means an intuitive thing, where you have an actual design. Take a dolmen, for example, that to put up stone walls that weigh many tons and then raise a capstone on top, that's not going to be an instinctive thing to do. And particularly when you look at the spread of dolmens, where they're very specifically designed to be, to have a tilted capstone, and it's a very distinctive design that you see spread all over the place. Well, it's just not going to. Well, you can say it's not. It seems highly unlikely that exactitude of design would develop independently in different areas. A row of stones, yes. A stone circle, even, yes. Why not?
Maybe.
But when it comes to the complexities of passage tombs and things like that, then that's clearly a shared culture.
Yeah. Mark says, to our question, he says, no, I went to school just up the road from there. He's talking about Cauldron,
Yes.
and only heard of the place a couple of weeks ago.
It's all very
So
timely.
now you got bragging rights there now, Mark, because you're living close by to the oldest known burial in. Yes, what's the collective name for those barrows, for those long barrows? There's the Medway too. Medway.
Is Cauldron one of the Medway
Yes,
tombs? I don't.
Medway
I
tombs.
don't,
That's
I
right.
don't
Yeah.
actually recall off the top of my
So
head.
Richard says. So I was told it originates in Orkney. Oh yes.
Yes, we were.
We were.
And only a year ago.
I don't know if you maybe you're talking. It is something else for you, Richard. I don't know. Yeah. But I mean, Neil Oliver's three-parter on the BBC about I think it was titled the new Stone Age capital of Britain, was that it? Shifting everything upside down to look at from Orkney down. But I have to reiterate this again because it's hard to get into my brain. It's probably hard to get into his brain as well. But even Orkney is 500 years behind the times on this.
Yes.
We're talking about almost like something else. If anything, it belongs to a second phase of expansion. But we've got to honour, what we call megaliths, to honour what we call these monuments. We can't ignore the fact that the huge concentration, tombs, megalithic sites, Karnak, stone circles, call it what you will, occurs over there. We're proud, rightly so, of our megalithic heritage, hence standing with stones, for goodness sakes. But compared with some areas on the continent, our density of megalithic monuments is quite sparse. So we have to honour that. We have to be inclusive about that and shift our thinking just a little bit in order to get to grips with what the actual spread was.
I think also worth reiterating that looking at the origins of all of this, I've got the diagram in front of me at the moment.
Which one?
The one that you were just showing a few minutes ago.
Shall I put it up again? Is that helpful?
Yeah, if you like.
If you want to talk about it specifically, I can move the map around.
Go on then. Put it up.
It's up.
Okay. That if you look at the red blobs, large and small, particularly Brittany, that earliest.
That's right
date,
in the middle. I've put Brittany right in the middle there.
Okay, so that earliest date of 4794.
Yeah.
Calibrated 4770. So that is the earliest point. Now, if you spread out, just look at the other red dots.
Yeah.
So you've got down in Sardinia 4733 there. Down in southwest Spain 4002. So you can, if you just look at the red ones, you can see how that first wave over a few hundred years, 200-300 years, was clearly, because of you look at the sizes of those red blobs.
Yeah.
That the biggest one, Brittany, but then if you look at that's around Switzerland, isn't it? Anyway, northern Italy.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
you've got the little red blobs, but that's the first stage where the culture was being established. Now, moving into the green phase, which is the secondary phase, and Bettina has only included here the beginnings of that second stage, where you can see that moving out. If you were going to look at all 35,000 megalithic sites across Europe, then the spread would be, well, it would blanket the entire map. Yeah. But it's like imagine the birth of any cultural shift, and it might be a shabby analogy, but just, go back 30 years, how many of us had computers? Well, if you think that initially, whether it was the likes of IBM or whoever, that it was just a small group of culturally shifting companies who had their own computers. And then there you are 30 years, 40 years later, that the whole damn world has got them. And so you have to look at the cultural shift of megaliths in pretty much the same way.
Yeah.
Initially, they would have been concentrated in these embryonic, if it's fair to call them embryonic at that stage, but maybe even centers of trade. And then the normality of it spreading out over the following however many hundred years. I think it's an important thing to try, and I'm struggling with it, to be honest, but to get in my own head, for example, if you've got 1,000 years, 500 years, 300 years, it doesn't matter what, how long would it take for people, initially seafaring folk, and you can see how that makes sense when you look at those red blobs, initially seafaring folk, and then moving into carrying the culture inland and across land, how long realistically would it take to for a culture comfortably to spread? And I think we can all say that when you look at it in that sort of time frame, it's not a surprise at all. What's a surprise is the order of it.
Yeah. And can I just add something when we were talking offline before, Rupert, that I mentioned? I would say, without any particular evidence, because you can't extrapolate this kind of thing from the dates themselves because they overlap and they have too broad a sort of bell curve as to where the absolute date lies. But I would suspect that these spreads would actually happen very, very quickly. That it's not that gradual a spread. That I think these kinds of transmissions have to occur within 1 or 2 lifetimes.
Yes.
So when we look at this sort of, I'll put it up again. When we look at these red, blue, and yellow blobs, they seem to be spread out, and everything seems to be spread out. I reckon each one of those blobs represents quite a short period of time, where things happen quickly and then it goes to stasis and things settle down and everything remains the same for a bit. Then something else happens, and within 30, 40, 60 years, things have changed again, and that's what we look at when we look at something which seems so incredibly stretched across time. I think if we could get down to a granular level, we'd see change happening very quickly in short spurts rather than gradually over thousands of years.
Yeah, I think, again, it's very important to say that this is a synthesis of all the carbon dates that are available.
I've just had a good question come in, Rupert, so just so you know, I'm just saying.
Yeah, go on.
Oh, okay, you okay with breaking off what you were saying?
Yeah, well, I was only going to say that this is a synthesis of the 2,410 available dated sites. So the fact that those dates are there, as Michael just said, it is quite likely that these shifts happened really quickly, and what we're looking at is to use Mike's word, is a stasis. That this is where it kicked off, and it lasted like that until the next phase where there was another visible spread. So, yeah.
So, John Hallisey.
Hello, John.
Oh, yes, there it is. Says, lol, apparently, according to the radiocarbon dates by Professor Gobran Burenholt, The passage tombs in Carramore, County Sligo, Ireland, date back to 5400 BC. As we indeed, I think we mentioned in the film Standing with Stones. That is 7,400 years before present day. Now, most archaeologists dispute the radiocarbon date that Goran Bojrenhut came back with, but in general, archaeologists in Ireland do agree that they started building in the west of Ireland first and moved east into the Boyne Valley and Newgrange later. Yes, I absolutely agree, John, but I think the very early dates have been recently recalibrated. I think the problem with Mr. Bojrenhut's carbon dates is they were derived from charcoal, which is very, very unreliable and subject to variations that take it rather outside of the I think more recent datings from actual remains from the tombs themselves have put the actual use of the tombs into the early 4th millennium rather than the back end of the 5th. So that doesn't diminish them in terms of Ireland. As you quite rightly say, they are still the earliest in Ireland, and they are early dates, but they still come after the dates for Brittany.
Another of the reasons that the dates have been recalibrated is that they were using a system where what's the Latin phrase? The Latin term, Mike? There is a Latin term specifically for this, where you to make sure that you're covering all bases, you go to the earliest possible date for it, and then the latest possible date for it. So basically, within their calculations, they were building in the most extreme spread, and it's through this more recent dating that they've actually refined them well within those original estimates.
Question from Janice.
Hello, Janice.
Heath, who asks, so none of the more recent Orkney digs are included if it is a synthesis of available data from 2010?
That is an extremely good point. I think, again, they're talking about burials. This is all about burials.
Yes.
So the recent stuff on the Ness of Brodgar
still doesn't bring it into the scheme of things, really. It still
not
puts
really
it in the second phase.
Maze Howe is very much within these calculations.
Well, no, it's not actually. Maze Howe is still relatively, compared to the Brittany stuff, is still it's 1,000 years out.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
No, what I'm saying is that Maze Howe has been included within these calculations.
Right.
Not that it's in Bettina's book.
Oh, yeah, sure. But the Ness of Brodgar doesn't really deal with. I mean, the Ness of Brodgar is the Ness of Brodgar, and the dates for the Ness of Brodgar,
the new digs going on there.
The new dates for there still don't extend it into the consideration for being at an origin place for as an origin place for megalithic culture. It's secondary. I'm just looking at Nick Card's actual book and trying to get the earliest dates because there was one structure, the earliest structure that they have is still 3000 BC. It's way behind everything else.
Interesting.
Sorry, I'm just looking at that's.
Yes.
That's Nick Card is the
he's the
chief archaeologist of the Ness of Brodgar dig. Yeah. So there we go.
Yes. I was just going to say something, and I'm having a senior moment.
Should we have a tumbleweed moment?
Yeah.
A communal tumbleweed moment. Are we? I think we're spent, Rupert. That was.
Yeah. You know what?
The brains are tested to their limits, I think.
Something that I really did like from this, but no evidence behind it or anything. It just sang the song. Was one of the things that always stuck in my head from when we were researching earlier on, when we were doing stones, was the myth, the legend that Callanish was built by black men who came from over the sea, and the fact that black men, in those terms, people are called whatever color by the color of their hair. And so to have, darker, swarthy mariners coming, and
there are all sorts of other kinds of issues about because we remember we're still not got the Bell Beaker people, who probably were a whiter shade of pale than the people we're talking about here. So that's a whole other issue again. Mark Somerton. Now, who would have thought? He's gone all erudite, and he's saying Latin dating terms are maybe terminus post quem and terminus ante quem.
Thank you. That is it exactly.
Yes. Yes. That's the what does the translation of that? It's terminus is before up until something or other.
It's just earliest limits and latest limits, isn't it?
That's it. Yes. And it's worthwhile mentioning. Did you say what the terminus post quem stuff actually was? This is why you can't reliably date a standing stone, because in order to place a standing stone, the ground underneath it has been disturbed, and if you date that stuff, that could be from way before.
Yeah. If you have dug a hole, you have disturbed stuff. If that is, you take any patch of land and you dig a 6-foot hole in it, well, you're digging down quite a long period of time, and you dig all the stuff out, and then you pack it back in. And as Michael just said, you might have taken something from 2,000 years previously and stuck it back in the top of the hole.
Yeah. Limit after which, limit before which. Very good. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I'll just put that up. So
thank you, Mark.
That's the quick translation. Who would have thought?
Yeah. But it's a very well, for me it's exciting anyway. The fact that one of the things that is many of the things that are coming out of just this huge leap forwards in our technological advances, that being able to measure isotopes as well, that we bang on month after month, that it completely changes the way we have to interpret data. That it's there's much less guesswork involved now, that you're talking about hard and fast measurable things. So as soon as you can date a bone rather than a piece of charcoal, or find exactly where a bead, if you can find out where the outcrop of rock was, that lump of stone was from where it was extracted.
Yeah, but my take is that the new techniques are wonderful and answer some questions, but actually make us ask much more complicated and nuanced questions. At which point the whole area starts to become very exciting. These new techniques are stirring the pot. And bringing in a whole new swathe of question marks into the pot. I should say, the reason I really interrupted you there, Rupert, was we are fast approaching the hour mark. And I think at this point, I ought to say that we will start winding up unless there are some burning questions from people who are viewing right now that we haven't touched upon, that may be something you really want answered, or there's a burning objection you have, that something that doesn't sound quite right. Now's the time. But in the last moments, I think Rupert and I... Sorry, go on, Rupert.
I was being whimsical. I was just going to say that now is a good time
Yeah.
to remind folks, if you hadn't heard before, we are pretty thrilled that Bettina Schulz Paulsson, who is responsible for this extraordinary work, we're interviewing her on Thursday, not live. We'll be having a good interview with her on Thursday, which we will bring to you in due course, but we'll be asking her all manner of questions about this.
Yeah.
So if any of you have any questions that you would like us to ask, send them in to us, but well before Thursday.
Yes, yeah. And this is Thursday this week, isn't it?
This week.
So yeah, it's only a few days away.
Yeah.
So this is the first real archaeologist, that we've interviewed for the podcast, isn't it? Actually live, yes, it is, because we've only interviewed Anthony, and for all his qualifications, he hasn't got any letters after his name.
Don't say
he hasn't been to archaeology school.
He hasn't been to archaeology school, no.
Whereas Bettina Schulz Paulsson is Department of Historical Studies, University of Gothenburg.
She's in fact her first dig that kicked her off on all of this was in Portugal 20 years ago. So yes,
and as we say, she's been working on this for 20 years.
It's insane.
It's a colossal amount of work, colossal. So Margaret did get a final comment in, which I need to read to us all, if that's okay, Rupert. Margaret says, "Sorry, haven't done my homework." Margaret, honestly,
seriously, no apology necessary.
We're catching up.
Yeah,
we only know that we've done our homework because we have to put our heads on the line, because we promised we would. Stone monuments are only part of the culture. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Other aspects, such as language, rites, or trading practice, may have spread at different rates and times. Absolutely. But we can't speak to that with radiocarbon dates. The stones have different functions, and their main purpose might not have been for burying the dead. Burial could have been incidental to the life that was going on, and people were merely buried where they died. Yeah. Absolutely. It's always important to keep the balance and not just get taken away with data.
Yeah.
But that said, this does give us a huge sort of skeletal framework from which to bolster whatever conjectures we may have about what other aspects of culture developed during the times. Yeah, I take that point absolutely. That cultural development is a slower thing. The dissemination of culture can be very quick, though.
With far more regional anomalies as well, and localized anomalies. That again, apologies if some of my analogies are shabby, but wherever you go in Britain, really. Or not just in Britain, pretty much around the world, really. A house is a house is a house. They don't vary all that much, whereas the cultures of the people within them are infinitely variable. So, absolutely, excuse me, hair in my mouth. That is a very valid point. But I think, the flip of that is that when we do have something that's measurable that can at least give us a foothold into a better understanding, then we have to grab it, or a foothold, I was going to say, and then we have to grab it with both hands. That's mixed metaphors. Mixed metaphors. We don't like mixing our metaphors, but you know what I mean. Michael, can you show everybody the cover of Bettina's book?
Yes, I can.
Because if you want to read this, it's a phenomenal tome. It's 400 pages of awesomeness, actually, and I do recommend.
And if you want to sort of access it, Have I clicked you off or something?
No, I'm here.
Oh, good. If you do want to purchase this, don't try it on Amazon. I'll put a link actually where you can buy the electronic version of this book. Why can't? There we go.
What?
Sorry, I was wondering why I couldn't get it on the screen properly. Time and Stone: Emergence and Development of Megaliths and Megalithic Societies in Europe. It is 400 pages. I mean, 50 of which are probably reference pages and
That is
stuff.
true.
But still, at least 350 pages of study, to put it mildly. You can get it for £16 plus VAT from PNAS, PNAS, which is the prehistoric something or other. What's its name? But I'll put a link.
I think
down below.
You can buy the paper book for 40 odd quid. I think
It's 48 quid from Amazon, the paperback. Yeah. So don't go there, unless
unless you particularly like to have the book in your hand. Which
So anyway, that's it. There's a lot of it, and it's got far more depth than, of course, we've been able to go into here. I'm just whizzing through the pages. She
goes through region after region after region, and oh my goodness me.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't talk about any of the. Well,
Margaret, you know that I'm. Is it what? How do you pronounce that? Podiatrist.
But
Oh God, how old am I? 64 years old, and I just don't know how to pronounce words that come up in. He said, "I grab feet with both hands all the time."
You're not helping, Margaret.
Podiatrist, surely. Podiatrist? I thought it was a podiatrist. I'm thinking, my brain's going, that's a paediatrician. But no, a podiatrist is... No, a podiatrist. Didn't know that. Jeez.
So, yeah, we will put those links up, and what else did I want to say? Yes, it was only you mentioning that Bettina is our first real archaeologist. Interview.
It's like waiting for the number 24 bus.
I am also very pleased to say that Dr. Kath Walker, who specialises in the Scandinavian axe trade into Britain, that's her big thing, and she's doing an interview with us as well, hopefully next week. We'll refine that shortly. But Kath, some of you might remember that Mike and I went to her lecture in the Wiltshire Museum back in, was it November? Where she let us manhandle her very impressive axe heads, and a fascinating lecture. So it'd be good to talk to her about this, particularly in the light of what we've been talking about this evening.
Very much so.
It's just so many things to weave together. So yes, two archaeologists in the space of a fortnight. Wonderful.
So with that, I think it's time to wind up. We hope your brains have been suitably fried.
In a good way.
In a good way, as have ours. I hope it's the source of much thought and good conversation in future open house. Excuse me, future open houses and on the community. And I hope that just helps further a little bit our understanding. For Rupert and I, will be onward and upward. Whatever, where will it take us next? Who knows?
Yes. So I suppose the next thing that you'll be getting from us is Pod 12 is
Pod 12. Also, I should mention there's quite a few of our Patreon supporters in the call here now.
You lovely people.
But for those that aren't, the Royal Wright Stones film will be coming out at the end of the week. The Patreon supporters already have it. Been very well received, I have to say. But you'll be getting the public version at the end of the week. So look forward to that. That's about it.
Yeah.
Mark says, thanks, chaps. Good night to you both. Mark, hope you enjoyed your wine.
Thanks,
we certainly did.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks all for tuning in, folks. It's lovely that you're interested.
It's awfully good, says Janice.
Thank you, Janice.
Bless you. Thank you. And with that, we will do our best to answer any comments we haven't later on. But for the time being, that's it from us. All right. Night, everybody. Thanks for being with us.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.